Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen, Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. We're going to have a lot more than 30 minutes of super fine jive here. Hey, Martin. Hey, Gene.
What could this be? It's the Limehouse Blues.
Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Maria. In New NYC. Hey, how you doing? Where did I just put my New York license? I got it on here someplace. Oh, here it is. My New York sightseeing guide license ready to go sooner or later. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Beth. Hey, Becky, Eric, and Samantha. Hey, Aviva. Evening, Lorena. Hey, Dave and Barb. Evening, Connie and Donna and Amy and John and Nikki and Lee. Hey, Steve. Hey, Kathy. Evelyn. Hey, Dina. Hey, Andrea. I've been missing New York, but at least on Toohey Avenue is New York Bialy and Bagel, which is a pretty serviceable job of imitating a good New York bagel. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Mishta. Hey, Toby. Hey, Carla. Hey, Zolma. Hey, Joanne. I just got a bunch there. Trish, Vicky, Joy, Vicky, Larry, Christy, and Savage GM6. Hey, Bridget. You know, Miles has lately taken to fighting me for ice cream, too. He's not that interested in people food normally. Hey, Susie. Hey, Linda. Hey, Aviva. Hey, Michael. Hey, Chris. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Robert. Adam, it's on Toohey just east of the interstate. New York Bialy and Bagel. They got the fish out and everything, so you know it's good. I'm there a couple mornings a week these days. Savage, this is Earl Father Hines. Live at the Grand Terrace Cafe that still stands on 35th, though it's a beauty place now.
Yeah, Earl Father Hines carries on now and presents Leroy.
Hey, Toria. Hey, Kathy and Amber. Hey, Natalie. Hey, Timberly. Hey, Bob and Pamela and Sherry. Bob, I usually beat Miles for that, but it's tricky. Hey, Pamela. Hey, Natalie. Hey, Dana. Hey, Alexandra. Hey, Miguel. Hey, Nancy. Well, yeah, in a New York Bialy and Bagel, I go in there for a large cup of coffee and 4 bagels, and it cost me like $6. So, hey, Diane and Joanna. These are the kind of bagels you can eat over like 3 days, and they're a whole meal unto themselves. Don't absolutely stick around, drink whatever you feel like. Drink water, drink coffee. Hey, Sheila. Hey, Kimberly. Hey, Kyle. Hey, Elaine. Hey, Mitch. Maria. Yeah, the bagels are $1. Fancy ones are slightly more, but not much more. Enjoy, Bat. Hey, Katie. Marshall, hey, Dina. Hey, Aaron. Good evening, Savannah. Hey, Amy and Beck, Barbara, Alex. Hey, Sherlock. Hey, Katie, Sparks has come up a couple of times lately. Hey, April. Whoa, Lee, I actually see all of that comment. That is enough for 1 week. This is a different app. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Karen and Kathleen. Tangerine popsicle. That sounds good. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Kath from Aurora, Illinois. I've got some Aurora content tonight, in fact. Hey, Karen.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Hey, Beth. Hey, Kimberly and Earl and Mona, Robin, Lee, Maria, April and Zulma. Hey, Kristen. Evening, Nancy. Hey, Maria. Hi from West Rogers Park. Hey, Terry and Sandwich. And Stephen and Kalamazoo. Zoo. Hey, Raina and MJ. Hey, Natalie and Pam. Yeah, it's like 85 outside right now. Which is hotter than I like it, personally. I mean, if I can't wear a jacket, where do I put my stuff? Hey, Chuck. Hey, Ground Babel. Natalie, perfect hat for it. Hey, Ellen and Christine and Gail and Dara in Omaha. Hey, Christine. Yeah, Miles is back on the couch right now. I don't know if you can see him, he's kind of camouflage on that particular couch. Hey, Kyle. Yeah, I got some man bags. I have many man bags. Hey, Jay. Hey, Pamela. I have quite a few of them, in fact. Haven't really had to use them much the last year. I didn't have a lot of stuff to carry. Hey, James, over on YouTube. Hey, Carol. Hey, Tara. A lot of people from Aurora tonight. That's well met. That's almost a pun on well met right there. I really wasn't going for that. I just had this sudden flashback of this Tolkien computer game from the early 90s where every time you bumped into someone, they'd say, "This is well met." Hey, Laura. Hey, Natalie. Hey, Lynn and Kathleen. Hey, Napor in St. Louis. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Ian on YouTube. Hey, Kirk and Donna. Hey, Christy and Geraldine. Evening, John. Hey, Jenny and Kelly and Sarah and Sunshine. Hey, Sunshine, I got some satchels. Satchels, messenger bags. I got quite a few. Hey, Allah. Yeah, I hauled the AC up for the window over here today. Hey, Alejandra in Roscoe Village. Hey, Lisa and Angie. I looked for another Father Earl Hines that didn't have a Tisket a Tasket on it. Haven't found one yet. Hey, Isabel. Hey, Sue. Mona, yep, I'm going to send out the emails tomorrow. I was going to do it today, but I got caught up doing all of this stuff. Definitely not watching old Disney Channel shows of varying quality.
We turn on now to the next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
A little bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me. Love it. Thank you, Phyllis. Hey, David in Vicksburg. Hey, Patty. Hey, Larry. I never liked how I looked in shorts. It's partly my high school girlfriend said that the sight of me in shorts nauseated her. I've never quite gotten over it. Sort of like my dentist when I was about that same age said I had the teeth of a 40-year-old dinosaur. I've never gotten over that either. So. Hey, William in Syria. Thanks, Jason. I hope you're talking about me. What do I know about 1510 West Montana? Off the top of my head, I don't know much. I'd have to look it up, but I could probably find something. Hey, Mom. Hey, Keely. Marie? Yeah, it is. I wonder if he used that same line on other people who wanted to sell braces too. Hey, Sue. Hey, Donna. Hey, Bob. But I've never liked my teeth. You'll seldom see a picture of me that shows my teeth. Hey, Drew. Hey, Susan. Hey, Lindsay. Yeah, well, I'm not famous for my teeth, or my legs. All right, we'll give Earl Father Hines to the end of this. And Eleanor, yes, PayPal is back. I have somehow convinced them that I'm not a gambling kingpin after all. Hey, Marine. Hey, Megan. Happy Thursday all around. We'll give Earl to the end of this song. Hey, Jennifer. And then we'll get started properly. Miles looks like he is all curled up for the evening, but he perks up when I say his name.
Well, we're about halfway through this giant concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra.
All right.
Be told, it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's South Side.
All right, that was Earl Father Hines from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side, now a beauty store. All right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, and H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, who of course we'll be covering tonight because tonight's talk is all about antique serial killers, the kinds of murderers who had mustaches and hats. Now, we tend to advertise H.H. Holmes as America's first serial killer, but really that's just marketing. Well, it's also, it depends a lot on what really counts as a serial killer. Some people say it's just anybody who kills more than one person over a period of time, not all at once. Others believe that you have to have this psychological need to kill and fit various other models to actually count as what we now call a serial killer. Holmes probably doesn't fit that model, as well as some of the other and even earlier people that we'll be talking about over the course of the night. So we had an awful lot of these old-timey serial killers passing through Chicago over the years, and I've been it's always been fascinating for me to research because so many of these stories just kind of slipped through the cracks over the years. Very few people knew, for instance, about H.H. Holmes until Devil in the White City came out about back in 2003. Some of these people are just as interesting, were just as famous in their day, but then over the years, nobody wrote a best-selling book about them, so they just kind of slipped through the cracks. We often say that history is written by the winners. That's kind of true, but more often history is just written by the people who write it down, because a lot of people don't. So, I've done this presentation a few times before. It was one of the first big virtual presentations that I did over a year ago now. Now, I felt like I had done it too much, so I haven't done it again since back in January. It's been almost 5 months since I did this one, but I always like to mix it up a little bit. So to start with, we're actually going to zip ahead in time. Normally we go chronological from the guy who was stalking Chicago in 1840 and work our way through the 1920s. Today we're going to start right at 1914 and go a little bit out of my usual jurisdiction. Here's Chicago, We are going to go out west, past Oak Park, past Oak Brook Terrace, past Wheaton, past Warrenville, and all the way to Aurora, Illinois. Just west of Naperville. Just about the edge of Chicago suburbia into Aurora, the city of lights, and of course the home of Cable 10. So there's a grave. I was drove all the way out here to look for a grave for Find a Grave Friday lately. I was kind of glad that I didn't, partly because it's over an hour-long drive out there, and this turned out to be a grave that you could find on Google Street Views. I think that's the first I've actually found a grave on Street Views. But we'll push that around here. Down on Fenton Street, you come to St. Nicholas Cemetery. It's a little bit further down than this. But right out there, you see this one with the cross on top of it and what appears to be a picture there. You can find it on Google Street Views. It is the grave of a woman by the name of Teresa Hollander. And right in the middle of it there, you can see this picture of her that's held up fairly well as these things go. It's a little bit cracked over the years, but it hasn't faded away or gotten all washed out like a lot of them have. In 1914, this is not only Teresa Hollander's burial place, it is actually also her murder site. In 1914, she was found dead here at St. Nicholas Cemetery after a terrific struggle that had ended with her being hit in the head with a blunt object. Now, there were not a lot of clues here. I mean, by today's standards, there would be. There were bloodstains everywhere. There were signs of terrific struggle. There were fingerprints that could be found, in fact. Most of the suspicion ended up falling on a guy named Tony Petrus. Tony Petrus had been, at least reportedly, her boyfriend, though it seems to have been her family were more into it than he was. This is him with the wife that he married over the course of the trial. So he was brought to trial. And the investigation got a little bit weird. Even a lot of investigators said there was really no evidence against Petrus except for the fact that he knew her and it was convenient. But the state's attorney even went to the morgue when her body was laid out and took a photograph of her retina. The idea was there was an old superstition that the retina might have retained an image of the last thing that she had seen, which presumably would have been her murderer. Now, the sheriff laughed the thing off and was really annoyed that the state's attorney had done this. He said that's an old wives' tale that was dismissed 20 years ago. An oculist that one newspaper talked to said, theoretically that would be possible, but you would need a camera that covers the whole spectrum of color, and there's no camera like that accessible here in Aurora, Illinois. Now, one of my favorite things to find out when I was looking this up the other day, and we'll cover this more, I think I'm going to do this again on Unsolved Mysteries on Sunday in a bit more depth, is they brought in Mary E. Holland. Mary E. Holland was a woman who was referred to as Chicago's woman Sherlock Holmes. She was an early fingerprint expert. This is a couple of years before fingerprints would first be used to convict someone in the United States, a case in which she was a witness, in fact. But she, as you see at the bottom here, found 20 reasons that the prisoner indicted, Anthony, was not guilty. And she noted that there were fingerprints, but they weren't his. She noted that he didn't have a scratch on him, and whoever had killed this woman had apparently been gone through a pretty terrific struggle in the process. So he was brought to trial once, and it was a mistrial. Most of the jurors wanted to acquit, but one of them just wouldn't change his mind. So he was brought to trial a second time. That time he was acquitted, and that probably would have been about the end of the case, except for the fact that the next month, a couple of months after he was acquitted, there was another murder here in Aurora, Illinois that was very similar. A woman was killed with a wrench. And this was not just any woman. This is a woman known as Jenny Miller, who bizarrely has very few photographs of her. It took me forever to find one. But she was the daughter of Holmes Miller, who had previously been the mayor of Aurora, and was generally referred to as the richest woman in town. As she herself is also buried in Aurora, she is up at Spring Lake Cemetery, not too far away from here, but not quite the same one. And that was just one. They arrested several people, but couldn't really find a motive. They couldn't really find a suspect. They believed it was probably a case of mistaken identity. I can't understand exactly why, other than did they just think this couldn't happen to someone like her? And then there was a third murder as well. There was a woman by the name of Emma Peterson, early 1915. This had now been about a year. But there's a picture here. This is Emma Peterson up at the top, Teresa Hollander down at the bottom, and the wrench that killed Jenny Miller. They couldn't find the Jenny picture at the time, so they had to go with the wrench. And people started coming up with names for whoever was doing these killings. None of them exactly stuck. They came up with things such as Hammerman, Yeah, I can't resist. Sorry. But when he comes up now, he's been referred to once or twice as the Aurora Ripper. Now, we don't really know for the life of us, whether it was just one person doing all of these crimes or anything. These weren't the only attacks. There were several people over the course of that period that said that they had almost been attacked by somebody. People would come running into a bar and say, I was just nearly attacked. But this has kind of fallen through history. It's one where I can't really say who the antique serial killer was because the crime was never solved. When it's mentioned at all, it's usually in connection with the Villisca Axe Murder House. In 1912, over in Iowa, there was a brutal murder of a whole family plus a family friend in this house, and they never had a suspect, never had a motive. Today, as you can see, it's a tourist attraction. The Axe Murder House. They do overnights and ghost hunts there. I can't imagine what kind of letters they get, but most of the time when I get nasty letters, it's usually because I'm not pushing every urban legend and not being absolutely classless about things. But that is a new one. We're going to cover this a little bit more, and we'll go a bit more into Mary E. Holland's theories about this case on Sunday morning when we do the Unsolved Mysteries in Chicago tour. But now we're going to go back into history a little ways, back almost 75 years before this to 1840, when we had our first possible known serial killer here in Chicago. Now, I don't have a drawing of this guy. Newspapers at the time, we've got this sentence of capital punishment here with a little bit of a note, but at the time, newspapers didn't really have pictures. Honestly, they didn't even have a whole lot of local news. A picture at the time would have looked about like this. You see they've got their Harrison and Tyler banner going. The Daily American was a newspaper that had a column or so of local news, then several pages about how much they hated William Van Buren in the summer of 1840. They were all for William Henry Harrison winning that election. And I feel like in 1840, there wasn't much call for local news in the newspapers because it was a very small town at the time. Everybody knew what all of the news was. Okay, there's 3,000 people in here, about 1,000 of us have cholera. That's about the news. But one day in 1840, a woman named Lucretia Thompson was found murdered out in the northwest woods. People had heard her screaming, but they thought she was just yelling for her cows. Her cows had gone missing someplace, and she was asking everybody who passed by her place, if you see my cows, send them back over my way. This shows you a little bit about what Chicago was like in 1840s, out in the northwest side neighborhood that would now be Jefferson Park. But they found Lucretia Thompson murdered and lying and surrounded by hogs. Nearby, a person who worked in the logging camp named John Stone was setting fire to his pants. So he was arrested by Henry Rhines, who would have made a name for himself as the first officer in Chicago to arrest a murderer, but later on made a name for himself as Chicago's most notorious slave catcher, hence me doing the hand jive on his grave right here. But they brought him in for a trial, and at the time he continued to insist, no, I did not kill Mrs. Thompson. They asked him, all right, Stone, so how come you were burning your pants? And he said, oh, because they were dirty, that's all. Actually, he said lousy, they were covered in lice. And he said, all right, well, how come you didn't burn your shirt, too? He said, well, there was no blood on that. Oops. So, naturally, he was brought to prison. He was sentenced to be hanged, but before he could be executed, there was a bit of a controversy around town as to exactly what his religion was. Was he a Catholic? Was he a Protestant? The kind of thing that people got really interested in. So they brought in a guy to interview him in prison, and during the course of the interview, he insisted once again that he had not murdered Mrs. Lucretia Thompson. But then he said, but I have murdered lots of other people, so this is probably fair. So what we're looking at here is a person who most likely did brutally murder Lucretia Thompson and casually mentioned that he'd done it to several other people before. This sounds to me like it fits the model of a serial killer fairly well, but there's really just not enough information to know for sure. But moving on a little bit, there wasn't another big murder case in Chicago, and again until 1854. And I've covered this guy a bunch, so I'll just do it briefly here. Guy by the name of George Green. This is the frontispiece of a book about him called The Life of George Green, the Chicago banker who murdered his wife. Now, the book portrays him as not having murdered just his wife, but half of his neighbors and half of his neighbors' children. The book is a little bit comical. It paints him as this real Dickensian villain who cackles as he tortures animals. But what happened, what he was in trouble for, was some neighbors came over and said, hey, we're here to see your wife. And he said, well, you can't. She died this morning. And they said, well, we just saw her yesterday. And he said, well, that's cholera for you. This was 1854. A lot of people were dying of cholera in Chicago in 1854, and it is a disease that kills you quick. But he had been threatening to murder his wife for so long that people got suspicious. Dr. James Van Zandt Blaney ran some tests, found that there was strychnine in the organs, and that was enough. He was brought to the prison where he hanged himself late in 1854. Despite rumors that went around for years that it hadn't really been him and he had actually had somebody else hanged in his place and disappeared off to England, even though they were selling photographs of his hanging body in the Daguerrean Saloon, like a mobile photo studio that was set up at the corner of Randolph and LaSalle at the time. I've never seen a copy of the actual picture, only the drawing of it, but probably gives you a pretty good idea. Most people's copies of the picture were probably lost in the Great Chicago Fire, but you never know what you might find in a drawer someday. But these are a few of them now that we've covered, or two of them, who were well before H.H. Holmes started operating in the 1890s, and we've still got a couple more to go before we even get to Holmes. So here we are on West Madison Street. We've covered this on any number of tours before. I never get tired of talking about this guy. Turn to the side here, we'll get more of a front view. It's a rainy day on Madison today. Or the day that I filmed this, anyway. But here you come to about the most innocuous thing on West Madison Street in the West Loop. About the 1100 block, in what is becoming kind of the Soho of Chicago, all the same shops you see in Soho. But also, a children's haircut place. But this children's haircut place occupies the same approximate space. Definitely not the same building, this is a newer building, but the same place where stood in the early 1880s the office of a guy named Dr. Thomas Neill Cream, who looks exactly as one might expect a serial killer would look in the early 1880s. Now, he was operating a doctor's office here, but was always performing abortions, which were illegal at the time, but really easy to get. It was about a generation later that the Chicago Vice Commission put together a study, found that of 20 doctors they went to undercover, 18 would either perform an abortion or refer them to somebody who would. So he was arrested after one of his patients died on the table, and newspapers could not resist making puns about the guy. Cream a tartar. A coroner's jury speedily decides that he is probably guilty of abortion. But in this case, he was actually acquitted and went right back to work. What got him in trouble is he had a girlfriend who was living out in Garden Prairie, Illinois, who was married to a guy by the name of Daniel Stott. Daniel Stott was one of the most prominent citizens in Garden Prairie at the time. And look at this. He had been out walking less than an hour before, came in and laid down on the sofa, was very soon taken in cramps, and before any of the neighbors could arrive, he was a corpse. Now, apparently, Dr. Cream had convinced his girlfriend to poison her husband, and this was found out fairly quickly. This is the Garden Prairie Cemetery. It's about 50 miles west of Chicago, out by Rockford. We'll move along here a little ways. It's one of my favorite gravestones anywhere. You so rarely see a gravestone with a murder mystery on it. This one, Daniel Stott, died June 12, 1881, poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. Very rarely see that. That time he was sentenced to life in prison and was sent out to Joliet Prison, but his brother back in the UK pulled some strings, eventually got him out of jail, got him back to the UK, where he took up a habit of poisoning young women. They would come into his office for an abortion. He would give them painkillers that were laced with an awful lot of strychnine. Now, he's another guy who would almost be forgotten today except for one thing, and that is he was hanged in the UK. And when he was hanged in the UK, according to the executioner, Mr. Billington, now this was a story that Billington liked to tell around the bar quite a bit. He said that Dr. Cream's last words before the trap door dropped was, "I was Jack the." Now, he didn't report this at the time. If he said it, none of the newspaper reporters who were present at the execution heard it. It might have just been him telling a good story, and anyway, Dr. Cream was beyond any reasonable doubt in Joliet Prison at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. But the full number of people that he may have killed will probably never be known. For instance, while I was digging around in the archives looking up a whole different story one time, I came across a reference to the mysterious death of Alice Montgomery. This was a young woman who checked into a boarding house one day. After dinner, she went up to the ladies' private closet and then was heard to scream. She came falling out, writhing in pain. By the time the doctors arrived, she had died. Turned out she had undergone an abortion, then taken some painkillers that were laced with an awful lot of strychnine. And this was all just a block away from Dr. Cream's office. Now, it's now being written into some Thomas Neill Cream books that are coming out that she was almost certainly a victim. The real mystery to me is how come nobody noticed it at the time. And there were a couple of explanations. One is that it all happened, that Cream's arrest all happened right around the time that James Garfield was shot. And then his conviction was right around the time that James Garfield, the president, died. So that's one possible explanation. Another is just that method of execution was not one that Thomas Neill Cream was known for yet. It's one that would not be well known until he moved to back to the UK. He's been the subject of a few books over time. Probably the best is a novel treatment, but based on all the best research available. Prisoner 4374 by A.J. Griffiths Jones. Now, Amanda Jones actually went... managed to get a hold of his prisoner file from Joliet Prison, which for one thing certainly established that he was in fact in Joliet Prison at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. People who were real proponents of the theory think that he might have been replaced by a double. You notice this is a story that comes up quite a lot. There's certain tropes that I notice a lot in serial killer stories. One of those is replaced by a double in prison. That gets referred to quite a bit. But another guy that we can cover next, another one before we even get to Holmes, has kind of a similar situation that a lot of tropes of later stories come up in his tales. And that is, let me back up a bit. Now here we are on North Avenue, just below Lincoln Park. Now, as we spin around here, the corner of North and Sedgwick, if you look for just a second, you'll see this convenience store. I was really hoping this guy's place would turn out to be where the European Wax Center was. But on further research, I determined it was actually across the street from the European Wax Center, where the Convenience Mart is. You can still see a couple of buildings in the vicinity that look like they would have been there about the 1880s. But right across the street from this, over to the left, was the office in the early 1880s of a guy named Dr. Henry Meyer. Dr. Henry Meyer ran an office here, and was later said to be experimenting with poisons by giving them to travelers and hobos who passed through and came to his doctor's office. This is a story that I see quite a lot in stories about early serial killers, is that they're always rumored to have been testing out their poisons on hobos, or possibly on their various wives. But what happened with him is he was married to a woman named Ida, and so Henry and Ida lived up above here, and a couple of blocks away lived Henry and Ida Gelderman. This is where it gets a little bit confusing sometimes, is Henry and Ida, and there was the other couple was also Henry and Ida. But Henry Meyer fell in love with Ida Gelderman. And they decided, it was well established during the trial that they were having an affair. One person even talked about like hanging out outside of their window and hearing them making out, which is another story that I notice comes up quite a lot in tales of old-time serial killers. There's always something where somebody was spying on them while they were making out. They didn't have television in those days, so apparently people spent a lot of time just snooping in their neighbor's window trying to catch them naked or something. In this case, the guy didn't really see them making out, but he heard them doing so, including at one point, Henry said, "That was a good one." But he decided it was the best way to get together with Ida Gelderman was to murder their respective spouses. So he poisoned both of them. He poisoned his wife, Ida, and he poisoned the other Ida's husband, Henry. Now, he was arrested for this after a while. The bodies were taken back up for chemical analysis. And here's Henry's grave here. Henry is at St. Boniface Cemetery, approximately this location. But it's an unmarked grave, so it's kind of difficult to find out for sure. But Ida, Henry's first wife, is at Graceland Cemetery up here in Section R. And for some reason, all the most interesting graves in Section R turn out to be unmarked. Almost all of them. And this is exactly what you would expect to find when you're looking for the unmarked grave of a serial killer's family. And this is this empty space right here, right to the right of the Slim Jim looking grave, is the Meyer family plot, where Ida was buried. along with a son. Now, this is a thing that after he was arrested, it came out also that when he remarried the other Ida, her son died shortly thereafter, and people got suspicious about it. But also, we've got all of these other kids here. There's Edwin, there's Alma, Elsa. Now, generally, like, Blondine dies of scarlet fever. That wouldn't have been unusual at the time. Infant mortality was very, very high in those days. The only thing I got confused about here was Victoria, whose date of death is the same date as her interment. It's usually a couple of days later. So, there's also this other guy, John Schuch, down there, who died, who was buried about 20 years after everybody else. I got no idea who he is or how he ended up being involved in all of this. Still working on that one. But Henry eventually got tired of Ida too as well. And having tired of Ida too, he apparently tried to poison her. She got really sick. It would have been consistent with the kinds of poisons that Henry was known for using. But she recovered. He ended up just divorcing her and married a woman by the name of Mary Dresser. And with Mary Dresser, he embarked on the career for which he would eventually be brought down, which is, she seems to have been just as big of a swindler as he was. They would pose as an unmarried couple. They would find rich guys for her to marry. Then they would kill this guy to get the insurance money. How many times they did this is very difficult to know, but he was eventually brought to trial over this. There was at least a couple of them that they had strong enough evidence on. But the trial was kind of a circus. Right in the middle of a trial, one of the jurors went insane. And apparently he had a complete nervous breakdown and started babbling as though he were Napoleon or something. I think he was claiming to be Jesus, but had a breakdown right in the middle of the trial. And in those days he didn't have alternate jurors, so they had to switch everybody out and do the trial all over again. At the time, Meyer had grown a beard. Here's how he looked like at the time. And, in prison it was very difficult to shave, though this actually came up in the H.H. Holmes trial. He had a beard during his trial, and there was an argument between the opposing lawyers. The prosecution kept calling it his prison beard. The defense wanted him to call it the beard that he grew in prison. But Dr. Meyer was sentenced to a term in Sing Sing prison. Somewhere along the line, there's a couple of things like saying that he's petitioning to be pardoned. And I guess he must have been, because sometime by the late 1910s, he was back in Chicago. And back at the same thing, he was trying to recruit young women into a scheme where they would marry guys for the insurance money, and he would arrange to have them die. There was even a letter that was intercepted that he wrote to one of the young women saying, "We evildoers love night and hate daylight." Now, there's only one thing from this period. This was a case that really just didn't make a whole lot of news in 1919. But they notice here Dr. Henry Meyer with an office at 508 Center Street. That's Armitage Avenue now, so we're only about exactly 4 blocks north of his original office that he had almost 40 years ago at this point. Stuck around the same neighborhood and everything. But in this particular scheme, he was captured and convicted again, and presumably died in prison, though I couldn't find it out for sure. It's kind of tricky to figure this guy out, partly because his name Henry C. Meyer is so common. He wasn't the only Henry C. Meyer in Chicago by a long shot. In fact, he wasn't the only Henry C. Meyer in Chicago who was born in Hamburg in 1834. It gets a little tricky with this guy, and he really hasn't been covered in much detail. But now we'll skip ahead to my biggest area of expertise, perhaps. We'll go down to the south side. I know I've covered this guy so many times over the years that I won't get too far into it here. But this is the Englewood Post Office on 63rd Street. And just to the left of that post office, occupying this empty space and overlapping about 4 feet with that edge of the post office there, was the site of what was known as the Holmes Castle. Now, this was a place that had been built by a guy by the name of H.H. Holmes. There's a picture missing there. But H.H. Holmes, where did that picture go? That's just bizarre that I wouldn't have a picture of him here. I could swing by. Well, dude with a mustache anyway. So, there it is. All right, so H.H. Holmes came to Chicago about 1886, having coasted his way through medical school. 1887, he broke ground for building this building. Initially just a 2-story place, then he added a 3rd floor that he told everybody was going to be a hotel space for the upcoming World's Fair. The hotel was never actually finished, and I don't really think that he intended for it to be, honestly. The idea was that by pretending to operate a hotel, he could swindle all the suppliers and all the investors, and then by setting fire to it, several insurance companies. He bought a lot of insurance policies on this place. But having set fire to the place, the insurance companies were not fooled for a second. He decided Chicago was getting a little too hot for him. So he went to his friend Benjamin Peitzel, said, "Ben, remember how I just got you out of prison down in Terre Haute for passing bad checks? Well, now it's your turn to do something for me. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go down to Fort Worth, where I just happen to have some property. And then after we build a place there, eventually, once your insurance policy matures, we're going to go to Philadelphia and fake your death and get the insurance money." Might think Peitzel would have known better than this guy, than this. So instead of faking his death, Holmes just killed him, then started traveling around the country with a couple of his children, Alice and Nellie Peitzel and their brother Howard Peitzel. So by the time he was captured, the kids were no longer in his custody. The insurance company put two and two together pretty quickly, traced him to Boston, arrested him, expedited him to Philadelphia to stand trial, where he cheerfully admitted, "Oh yeah, I faked Benjamin's death. I'm a big insurance fraud guy. Not a murderer, just a big insurance fraud guy." So at the time, though, he no longer had the kids in his custody. And he said, "Oh, they're off with their father. Remember how he faked his death? He's taken them to South America or something." So for a little while there, he was a huge celebrity. Now, they just thought he was an insurance swindler at the time, but he was what they would call the 9 days wonder. For the first 9 days after his arrest, everybody was talking about this guy who had swindled the insurance company. But by spring, when he went on trial, he changed his story a bit. He said, "Okay, that was in fact Benjamin Peitzel's body. He committed suicide. I just tried to make it look like an accident so that his family would get the money." At that point, they said, "All right, Holmes, well, in that case, what happened to the children? They were supposed to be out with their father." And he said, "Well, really, they're out with an old girlfriend of mine named Minnie Williams who has taken them to London. Put an ad in the paper, you'll probably be able to find her." Of course, they put the ad in the paper, didn't find anything. So a detective named Frank Geyer was put on the case. Holmes had been traveling around with these girls who knew entirely too much about the fact that their father was in fact actually dead. And then eventually Alice and Nellie, the girls, were found buried in a cellar in Toronto. Now, at this point, everybody realized Benjamin Peitzel had definitely been a murder victim and remembered that Holmes had this building back in Chicago that had actually made the newspaper for being full of hidden rooms and secret passages that Holmes was using to hide stolen furniture. So at this point, everybody decided to go looking into the thing. The Chicago police, though, at the time were run by a guy named John J. Badenoch. He was the new chief of police. 3 months before, he had been a flour and feed dealer. He became chief of police just because the new mayor liked the cut of his jib, and they spent a few weeks just digging around the place trying to find, I think I'm getting a bunch of messages. I'm pronouncing Terre Haute wrong. Sorry about that, folks. They spent a few weeks digging this place up and just kind of went nuts saying, "Oh, we found a rope. Maybe he was hanging people. We found some gas lines. Maybe this was for a gas chamber, not regular heating or lighting." So the story just got wilder and wilder, and eventually the newspaper started saying, "You know what, maybe the police should talk less and actually find a bit more." Right as they said that, the police showed up with a guy named M.G. Chappell and said, "Okay, here's why we couldn't find any bodies or any evidence that could be used to bring him to trial. This guy, Mr. Chappell, is a skeleton articulator. He used to buy the bodies from H.H. Holmes so he could turn them into skeletons to sell to medical schools." Very quickly, it turned out, and this got worked into the Holmes legend very quickly, but in Chicago, the story only lasted a day before reporters determined that this was just a guy who had been a skeleton articulator years and years before, but now was just somebody who would say whatever the cops told him to if they poured enough whiskey down his throat. It was all sort of starting to die out in Chicago when New York World published this diagram of the Castle building. What the press had started calling the castle early in the investigation. And if you've looked up the Holmes case, you've probably seen this diagram with things like the room of the 3 corpses, the hanging secret chamber, the dark room, the asphyxiation chamber, the death shaft, the maze. Some of this was based on actual reporting, some of it just came out of their own imagination. But there were quite possibly people who had been killed in here. For one thing, Holmes had a girlfriend named Julia Connor back in 1887 through 1889. She and her 6-year-old daughter Pearl disappeared on Christmas Day of 1891. After she disappeared, Holmes took up with a girl named Emmeline Cigrand, whose cousin B.J. Cigrand is actually buried in the very same cemetery as Emma Peterson out in Aurora, Illinois. Found that out just while looking all of this stuff up. She disappeared in May of 1892. And then in 1893, Holmes had been dating Minnie Williams. They were passing themselves off as a married couple. And she lived with her and her sister Nanny up on the north side. Minnie and Nanny had both disappeared in July of 1893, and Holmes started announcing that he was now the owner of her property that she owned down in Fort Worth. Even had documents indicated that she had sold it to him for $1. But not a lot was really found that could be used to bring him to trial in Chicago. He was eventually put on trial just for the murder of Benjamin Peitzel in Philadelphia, and that was enough. He was sentenced to be hanged. Wrote a big confession in which he claimed to have killed 27 people. The more realistic number is 9 or 10. Several of the people he confessed to having killed were not even dead yet at the time. Others were known to have been fictional characters, people whose names that he just, he occasionally claimed that there was someone named Horace Williams, a brother of Minnie. She did have a brother, but his name wasn't Horace. So he was hanged in May of 1896, and once again, there was a story that it wasn't really him. He was replaced by a double in prison, and they hanged the double instead. It wasn't a really big story. It came up just briefly in 1898, but they were able to use that. The History Channel was able to use that just a few years ago to have the body exhumed, and that's how he appeared. Turned out it was, in fact, H.H. Holmes down there. I told them it was going to be. But let's check out, let's stay on 63rd Street for a second. I'm going to try to pause this just a sec. I got to move back. All right, so there is the place again. But if you look like right behind me, a little bit further down by these lights, you would get to Union Street. That street to the right of the post office is Low Street. Next street down is going to be Union. Now, right at 63rd and Union in about 1904, about 11 years after Holmes left the place, there lived a guy by the name of Johann Hoch. He built a cottage there, and personally, I think it's probably unlikely that he did it without knowing about the Holmes building, which was still there at the time. It was there a lot longer than people seem to think that it was. I kind of suspect that Hoch may have been a bit of a Holmes fanboy. Now, when they caught up with Johann Hoch, he had already proposed to what they think would have been wife number 55. This guy would meet a woman, propose to her, then take her money and run, all in the space of about a week. Now, about a third of the time, he also seems to have killed him. He wasn't exactly a debonair guy. I always say he looks like the guy on the Pringles can. And he talked like a German character on The Simpsons. He was referred to as like a German dialect comedian quite a bit in his time. But, whoa, that's a little bit off. So the last woman he killed in Chicago, in that cottage at 63rd and Union, a stone's throw away from the old Holmes Castle building, a woman named Marie Walker. He had met her through a personal ad. They talked for about 20 minutes. Then he said, "All right, I like you, you like me, we can get married then, yeah?" So she agreed. It was really just a business proposition more than anything else. But as soon as they were married, he started giving her arsenic. She died in that house a block away from the castle just shortly after their marriage. And while her body was lying on the bed, Hoch proposed to her sister, Amelia. And Amelia said yes. So he didn't kill her, he just took her money and ran, which was a couple of mistakes. She arranged to have Marie's body disinterred and found out that it was absolutely loaded with arsenic, which in those days had been kind of a perfect crime. There was arsenic and embalming fluid most of the time, so as soon as an undertaker stepped into a room, nobody was getting convicted of arsenic murder. But things had changed. They were now using different kinds of embalming fluids. The undertaker was ready to testify. He had not used any arsenic on her body. So when it was found there was only one way it could have gotten there. Hoch was traced to New York, where he was staying in a place where he had already proposed to the landlord, and was found carrying a fountain pen, actually pictured here in a New York paper, that was full of arsenic powder. Hoch tried to say that he was planning on using it on himself. Not sure it really came out to that. But the number of people he was suspected of having married just kept going up and up and up. Here it had gotten up to wife number 55. And reporting on him got wilder and wilder. There's all these things about The high forehead, the blue eyes, ways that you could help identify him. There was a while they even said that he might have also been a twin brother of another Chicago murderer named Louis Holmes, who in the picture, frankly, looks nothing like him, even by the standards of the time, where pretty much everybody had the same mustache. Then people noticed that he had been living right near the old Holmes Castle building, and speculated that maybe he had in fact worked at the castle. A couple of witnesses were even brought in who said, yes, I recognize that man. He used to take my rent when I lived in that building. But of all of them, most of them I couldn't trace to have ever having been there. The biggest witness who says, yes, I even have pictures to prove it, was M.G. Chappell, the same skeleton articulator, whose stories once again did not hold up into checking. The most reliable witness they brought in was Dr. Robinson, who had been running the jewelry store. He thought the whole thing was a joke. He said, nope, never seen the guy before in my life. He was a lot more of a straight shooter than these other people. So he was arrested. Inspector Shippey made a name for himself at the time. And Hoch was eventually hanged in 1906. Now here's the thing. For years, I thought he was buried at Dunning. I've been telling people he was buried at Dunning because he was at first. That was the old Potter's Field. But I just noticed lately Find a Grave said that he was at Elmwood Cemetery in River Grove. And I finally did find a thing indicating that a few months after he was buried here at Dunning, he was removed to Elmwood. So that's a new one to find sometime. It's run by Dignity Memorial. There's no search over at Elmwood. It would be a difficult one to find. I'm sure that it's unmarked, but he's out there someplace. Years later, a story went around saying that he wasn't actually trying to murder his wives. He was just a scientist who was testing different kinds of poison. One of those stories that comes up quite a bit. But the guy was just such a goofball. When they were hauling him back from New York to Chicago, they said, all right, Hoch, how come you married so many women? He said, oh, other women for Johann go crazy, yeah? Then they asked, all right, we want the names of all of your wives. He said, the last one was Mrs. Johann Hoch. The one before that was Mrs. Johann Hoch. The one before that was Mrs. Johann Hoch. He thought the whole thing was a giant joke, not having followed the advances in the embalming arts and sciences enough to know that he was probably going to be convicted. There's a very similar murderer operating at the same time in Chicago who is now buried out at Forest Home Cemetery, which we've been to a couple of times lately on Find a Grave Friday. But right over here, there is an empty space that I had an awfully hard time filming when I was first doing this. Remember last year there were so many storms? For a while, this whole place was underwater. I would see like ducks swimming by over her grave. But this was another Chicago serial killer who had left a thing in her note saying, it is my wish that I be buried in the Forest Home Cemetery at Oak Park, Illinois. It's really Forest Park. Signed, Belle Gunness. Now, Belle Gunness may have been the most prolific serial killer that we talk about here. Nobody really knows for sure because the full extent of her crimes could never really be properly investigated. But she got her start here in Chicago, as far as anyone knows. Here in Chicago, she ran a candy store with her husband over on Grand and Elizabeth. But when the candy store burned down and she got some insurance money, she apparently decided, hey, that's a good way to make money. And then people like her husband started dying off. Supposedly her husband died the one day that his two insurance policies overlapped. There were also lots of stories about her living with children who would be there for a while and then just disappear. Eventually she had made enough money to buy herself a farm out in LaPorte, Indiana. But one night that farm burned down, and when people started digging through the rubble of the place, they started finding lots and lots of bodies in the place. Lots and lots. It became almost a circus-like atmosphere, which is another thing that happens a lot when people find these places. Like the whole town shows up to dig around trying to find whatever they can find. So at the time, they were still figuring everything out. The Chicago police said that she was probably just part of a gang of Chicago slayers. They were probably just shipping the bodies down over to the farm. Where they all came from was kind of one of those things that depends on who you ask, really. So she had apparently been placing ads placing personal ads in matrimonial sections. There was even one letter recovered that said, "You'll love my farm. Come prepared to stay forever." So she would lure guys out to the farm, kill them, and then apparently feed them to the hogs. Now, very little of this is can really be verified. We don't really know what started the fire. We don't really know who started the fire or why. There was a farmhand who might have done it, but At the time, they weren't even really sure that she was dead. Newspapers even published all these mock-ups of what she might look like disguised as a man. One guy got beaten up on the train because people thought that he might be Belle Gunness in disguise. So the body was so badly destroyed that they couldn't really make a positive identification at first, until they finally found a couple of teeth and a dentist who would swear that yes, those are her false teeth that I made for her. So the rest of her body was not in good enough shape. Now, at the time it was even suggested by the police, what if Mrs. Gunness and Johann Hoch had plotted against each other? I can just imagine this. What if they had answered each other's personal ad and had tried to murder each other? You'd get a real black comedy out of this. Now, the best book about her written, I've occasionally been tempted to write one myself, but Harold Schechter recently put one out called Hell's Princess. He went through every piece of data, and frankly, it's still a big open question. He didn't end up really with any clear theory about what happened that night that the farm burned down, but this is probably the best work on Belle Gunness that is ever going to come out. I'm happy to say that because Harold Schechter apparently has been talking up my H.H. Holmes books to people lately, but around the same time that she was doing all of this down in LaPorte, Indiana, there was another possible woman serial killer back in Chicago, though the blame fell on this dude. Kind of a Johann Hoch looking guy, really. This is Herman Bilik, a picture taken when he was a couple of years younger than I am now. So Herman Bilik was an immigrant from what they called Bohemia, probably what would now be present-day Czechoslovakia, but one day he was approached by a woman named Mary Vrazel. Now, Herman was operating as a palm reader, a palmist, and also kind of a wonder worker. If you needed a love potion or something, he's the person you would come to. Mary went to him for a love potion. He happened to find out that her father had a very successful milk business. That would be her father Martin and her mother Rosa. So Herman got into the family's confidence. Martin, I believe, hired him to curse a milk business rival or something. And then the family began to die. The first to go was Martin himself. And after that, after his family got the life insurance, his daughters Mary and Tilly died shortly thereafter. Then his wife Rosa died as well, apparently right after she had been about to go to the police. The story was that she was going to go and confess to these crimes, but say that Herman had put her up to it. So Inspector Shippey, still here and still doing ridiculous things, as was kind of his trademark, found another daughter named Emma, who seemed very interested in the whole thing and had been about to say that her mother was committing the murders. Brought her to the house, not telling her that her mother was dead yet, just pulled off the sheet to try to startle her. And she immediately fainted. Then when she got up, she said, "It was Herman. Herman did all of this. You have to get Herman." So this became a bit of a story. They started publishing pictures of all of the people. Did they swallow Bilik's powders? The story was that he had been slipping them arsenic, presumably to get insurance money, but also there was a rumor that he had been having an affair with Rosa and wanted to get the rest of the family out of the way. The story was also that Rosa had actually died by suicide, not of murder himself, though notably, Herman's own wife and daughter were not killed, which makes it kind of a weird case to say that he was trying to get the other family out of the way. The main witness against him at the time was a young son of the family, Jerry Vrazel. He became the main witness, gave particularly damning testimony, and Herman was eventually sentenced to be hanged for murdering most of the family. His conviction was upheld by Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who would go on to be the famous head of the Commissioner of Baseball, who banned the 1919 Black Sox. But after Herman was brought to prison, Jerry took it all back. He said that none of what I said was true. The police told me I had to say that or they would pin all of the murders on me. And eventually, after a lot of due diligence, Herman was pardoned and released from prison. Now, his sentence had been commuted from hanging to life in prison fairly early on because there were doubts about his guilt. But after the testimonies were all reversed, he was released from prison in 1917, died just shortly thereafter. And in another case, once again, there's a really good book on this one by Steve Shookus called Poisoned. Spent years going through every bit of data about the guy, tried to put together what had really happened and how it got covered up by wildly corrupt state's attorneys making a name for themselves and, of course, the police. And his theory, and one of the more common ones, is that the real murderer was probably Emma Vrazel. Emma Vosel had the means, she had the motive. Just about everybody who died shortly after visiting her. She was the most adamant that Bilik should be hanged. Even after he was pardoned, she said, well, give me the rope and I'll kill him myself. But in the middle of all of it, though, her husband also died. And arsenic was apparently found in him again. There were some efforts made to cover up the fact that arsenic had been found in her mother's body. But after Herman was released and after he died, she just lived a quiet life and died several decades later. We're moving right along here. I'm well over time tonight, so I'm going to do a couple of other quick ones. Also wanted to cover today for the morning mini tour. Turn the volume down there. We went out to the 2044 block of West Ogden Avenue, which is now a Starbucks, because of course it is, where really it would have been a little bit further down past the Starbucks parking in this new space that they're putting up. But here lived a woman by the name of Louisa Lindelof, who later became known as the Crystal Ball Killer. She was a fortune teller by trade. She owned a crystal ball that she said cost her $500 in 1912 money, and said that it contained an actual tear from the eye of Cleopatra. And one of the ways that she made a name for herself as a fortune teller was accurately predicting the deaths of family members, who were later determined to have been pumped full of arsenic. Now, one thing I can't really figure out myself is whether she really bought what she was selling. She really played up the fact that she was a fortune teller. She claimed that she knew that she was going to be acquitted because the ghost of her children had told her inside of the crystal ball. I would initially say she had to have been putting them on. She was an adult. You know, normal adults don't really spend $500 in 1912 money on crystal balls and claim that they're talking with the dead and expect to be taken seriously. But then I see the comments we get every time we try to debunk urban legends here or on effing Chicago. I say, yeah, there are in fact people who get right into that. She was defended in court by a guy named George Remus, whose daughter, Romola Remus, pictured here as Dorothy, was the first to play Dorothy in a Wizard of Oz movie. Later on, he would be involved in a huge murder case himself. Some say that he was the inspiration for The Great Gatsby. But Louisa was brought into prison, continued to say that she was definitely going to be acquitted, tried to claim that the real reason they had found all the arsenic in the bodies was because there was arsenic in the wallpaper, which is something that a lot of murderers tried to do after people found out that the bright green arsenic wallpaper was actually dangerous. It's a good book about this called Bitten by Witch Fever by Lucinda Dickens Huxley. But it was no use. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison, died about a year after her conviction here in jail. She's another one of these people that I'm really kind of surprised she isn't better known. A lot of her stories kind of get folded into stories of other serial killers, most notably another person that is occasionally said to have been a psychic killer, though that wasn't really part of the story at the time, which is a woman by the name of Tilly Climic. Let me move over here a bit. This is the 900 block of North Winchester Street in the Ukrainian village. This is one, the source is actually, the building is actually still standing. So here lived a woman by the name of Tilly. Now with her last husband that she lived with here, I think it was her third husband, one day her third husband became sick and he started saying, well, I think I'll get better. And she said, nope, you're going to die. She even pointedly knitted a mourning veil in front of him. So the story went that when he died, she turned on the radio and danced around a little bit after teasing him for weeks. Now, shortly thereafter, she got married again. And once again in her trial, there was a story about somebody snooping on them from above the roof and seeing her making out on the porch with some other guy. But shortly thereafter, she was living a few blocks away on Tell Street, which is now Thomas Street, in this house right here, with her last husband, Joseph Climic. Joseph Climic got really sick himself, and having gotten really sick, he was sent to the hospital where they found that he was suffering from arsenic poisoning. Now, by this time, enough things had happened with Tilly that people were getting suspicious when this came up, and she was arrested. They started digging up the bodies of her other husbands and finding that there were an awful lot of arsenic in a lot of them. And pretty soon, the list of people she might have poisoned started to include neighbors, husbands, children. Eventually, the list got up over 20 that she said was done in connection sometimes with her cousin, Nellie Kulik, who lived just about a block away from this, at 1419 Wade Street, which is now Cortez. I think it was 1419. Some sources say 1219. It goes back and forth a lot, but 1419 puts her closer to the action. But this is Tilly over on the right and Nellie on the left. Nellie in her mid-40s in this shot. Now, they were referred to at the time as the priestesses of a Bluebeard cult in the neighborhood. So, Tilly was laughed her way all the way through this. Now, Nellie did not speak a whole lot of English. Tilly spoke English with a very thick Polish accent. Both of them have been in the United States since they were toddlers, but this was a very insular community that they lived in where it was not uncommon for people to grow up not speaking English at all, just living strictly within the Polish community. But the bodies continued to be exhumed, and Tilly was eventually sentenced to life in prison. She lived until the 1930s when she died in jail. There's a bit of an interesting question here as to exactly where she's buried. There's a find a grave that says she's a Bohemian national. Notes from the time, and from what I can do from the research, she's probably actually over at St. Adalbert's, though she's under a slightly different name. But it's a bit of a trick. Nellie somehow was acquitted. I say somehow because I really don't know what made the jury decide that she was innocent after all. Her children testified against her. So it must have been very awkward dinners around the Kulik family thereafter. But all right, we're a bit over time, so I want to go ahead and plug the upcoming tours. We'll cover some of these same things. I want to do a bit more on the Aurora Ripper in a bit more detail. So Sunday morning is Unsolved Mysteries from Chicago History, a big grab bag of a tour that I do occasionally. I'll work in some more about that stuff. I want to get more into the Mary E. Holland stuff. And a week from today, Thursday night, I decided way too late to do this one, so I'm kind of scrambling. But next Thursday, it is a time travel pub crawl. For those of you new around here, when we started doing virtual tours, I thought it would be fun to do a virtual pub crawl. And since it's virtual, we're not bound by time or space. We can go to any bar that ever existed. We'll bring in some musicians to help recreate the atmosphere. We'll post some recipes for custom cocktails. They are so much fun. I hope to see you back next week. And after that, the week after, we will be on the road. So for the first time in over a year, Thursday night, I will not be able to run a tour on June 3rd. But we're still sticking on the regular schedule so far. It's just kind of a one-off. We won't be around. So mini tours, of course. Over on the Facebook page, we do mini tours every day at 10 o'clock, including Mondays are Mural Monday, and Fridays, including tomorrow, are Find a Grave Friday. That's where we go to a cemetery where I know there's a particular grave, but I don't know exactly what it looks like or where in the cemetery it is. We figure that out in the comments and then play hot and cold till I get there. And of course, Fridays at 6:30 p.m. on the Fatty Vasquez Show Facebook page, we do a show called Whiskey and a Cookie, in which we drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. And make prank phone calls to politicians that I think deserve it. Should you need a Mysterious Chicago hoodie, sweatshirt, coffee mug, flask, etc., check out cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago for all of your Mysterious Chicago stuff needs. And now, once again, folks, I am back on PayPal, finally. I managed to convince them that I'm not a gambling kingpin after all. So with that, I will put the Earl Hines back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. Thanks for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago.
Dancing here in the cool atmosphere for this jive of
Thanks, Jenny.
yeah, but now,
Whoa, that went down the wrong pipe.
now can be told.
Whoa, wow. Hey, Emily. Hey, Ashley. Well, Lisa, what do you think? Are we going to be like, oh, yeah, we got some other stuff coming up, I guess. They're going to do this one other thing. You know, come or don't, whatever. Lisa, this is Earl Father Hines live at the Grand Terrace Cafe in Chicago, 1938. Oh, yes, there is also a page. There is, and we probably will do a morning tour on June 3rd. Well, I'll see. I'm going to be on the road. We're off to see Lenora. Maybe I shouldn't ask you, but I gotta scroll back up to that. You wouldn't consider antimatter a mass murderer, would you? I would say antimatter is a mass murderer. Hey, Limond. If anybody's just joining us, we're actually at the end of the tour right now. It was at 8 p.m. Central Time. But about 10 minutes after we're done hanging out here. Denise, poison was cheap. You could get arsenic and say you were just using it on rats in those days. But also, there was arsenic and embalming fluid, so it was easy to get away with. Trudy, I can't do Venmo right now. I haven't yet convinced them that I'm not a gambling kingpin. But I hope that we can iron that out in the next couple of days. Missed one there a second ago. Are my books available on Cafe? My books are not on Cafe Press, but your usual ebook places will have most of them as ebooks. Dave, that could have been an experience. Kathy, Ronnie will be on the road with me. We're off to see her mom. Is it Miles' time? Yeah, I think it's going to be Miles' time. Miles, oh, where'd he go? He was on the, oh, here he is. Hey, Miles. Come here, Miles. He's coming. Miles. Come here, baby, yeah. Yep. They want to see you. Mm-hmm. Here is Miles, everybody. Carol Aiden's about to graduate as well, yeah. Oh, you're getting so heavy, Miles. You trying to wave? All right. That's my boy. Oh, the Holmes girl voice? Yeah, I could probably play that. Hang on a second. I don't have it on this, in this thing set up. Gary asks, okay, so there was a time when I was down in the basement of the Holmes castle. Let me see if I can find the file here. I've got it under the name Computer Run File. I think it was when I was years back when I first recorded. I was playing it on Ghost Stories. I like the idea of just saying Computer Run File. So, okay, so in the basement of the Englewood Post Office, the one part that overlaps with the Holmes building, I had an audio recorder running, realized that I was at that moment the envy of every ghost hunter in town, so I just started whispering names to see if anything got picked up. I whispered the names of the very few people I think might have actually been killed in that building, mostly Julia and Pearl Connor, maybe Emmeline Segrand. So then I didn't hear anything when I played it, but when I played it, at the time, when I played it back, there was this voice like a little girl singing that's louder than my own voice. So see if you can hear this. First there's me whispering, then there's like a girl singing. Anybody we don't even know about. Come on. Let that go one more time. Spooky, huh? Now, I never try to hold that up as like proof of the paranormal or anything, but it's spooky. Tyler, yes, I will. I'm definitely talking with the Dead Ringer Quartet. They've got their contract is so tricky these days, but I don't know if I can get all the stuff they need for their dressing room.
A little kiss at twilight.
Yeah, as near as I can translate, it sounds like the girl is saying, sorry, beefalo there. But everybody out there just has to take my word for it that I didn't fake it. And the logical thing to do would be to think that I did. It's not like this stuff is hard to fake. Jenny, I'm sure if I played that recording for Ed and Lorraine Warren, they would have had a lot of fun with it. Octavia, yeah, I brought up some of this stuff when I talked with those various shows. Well, no, Miles will be here with the house sitter. He's just hanging out on the floor right now. Well, my angle adjusts right. There he is. Well, thanks, Octavio. I've had files on the Aurora Ripper for a long time. I don't know why I never worked it into this one. Jacqueline, that sounds about right. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Bat. Thanks, Susan. See you tomorrow for Find a Grave Friday.
And down the groove now, we rather imagine you'll hear that famous 7.
Yeah, followed by a cheesy movie that some people would absolutely be furious if you didn't suggest that maybe not all of it was exactly true. Thanks, Mickey. And thanks, Diane. The name of the Dr. Cream book. I can never remember the exact number myself. Would have gone with a different book title, personally. But Prisoner 4374. Something, I feel like titles should always be easy to remember. Like my book Sparks that I did under the name of S.J. Adams, they wanted it to be called The Epic Completely True Blue Almost Holy Quest of Debbie. Like, that doesn't even abbreviate to anything. Now, for those that don't know, last night on Effing Chicago, Mandy Cripp did a talk on Ed and Lorraine Warren, who originally wrote books about ghost hunting, but then after The Exorcist came out, it was all about demonology. Sorry, Savannah, I didn't mean to put that on again. When I switched screens, it just came up. Amy, there's only so much I can tell you about the Aurora Ripper. I covered it at the beginning of the program today. But there were a number of consecutive similar unsolved murders in Aurora in 1914 and 1915, plus possibly a number of attempted ones. Octavio, I tried to, anyway. Miles? Okay, Miles is climbing my pants currently. There you go, buddy. Come up. Oh, look at me, I'm Glenn Danzig. Jay, yeah, I get copyright dings on YouTube for the Benny Goodman, never on Facebook. But, it's just a mild annoyance. Martin, no, we didn't do too much. I didn't end up kicking anybody on many of these things. I wasn't really sure what these people were on about. Some of them came in thinking they were getting a revival meeting, or that Mandy was going to say, yes, these people really talk to demons all the time, and that everybody in the comments would be saying, yes, yes, tell us more, of course they did. And seemed really shocked that it wasn't just that. Patty, Charlotte's having some health issues. I don't want to go into it too much right now. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Lydia. Yeah, Adam, I've kind of, people ask about, that's why, what happened last night with Mandy's comments were very similar to why I don't do big presentations on Bachelor's Grove. There are certain people who get way, way into it. And even if I were to say, yes, it really is a portal to the netherworld, there are people who would get really mad that I didn't say it was a vortex. Sorry, Audrey, it'll be up later. Yeah, I thought she was a lot more fair and balanced on them than I would have been, personally. Jacqueline, yeah, there's, people get really weird about Bachelor's Grove, and personally, my opinion is, people have had weird experiences there, but it's also a place where teenagers have been getting wasted since at least the 1950s, and probably before that, which is going to be where the vast majority of the stories come from. One friend of mine once said the most paranormal thing about the place is the way it makes grown adults act like 8-year-olds. Kristen, I was thinking of doing something with that Johann thing. I was thinking of doing like a new t-shirt that's a whole bunch of headlines. Tony, yes. The best strategy with arguments in the ghost hunting community is do not engage. I think the only comment that we hid is that somebody afterwards said, how dare she ask for money after this? Like, you don't mess with her money. I mean, these things are all free donations suggested, but if somebody's going on saying don't donate, you're gone. We've been on kind of a banning spree on effing Chicago anyway. We took a picture of ourselves drinking at a bar now that we're all vaccinated. Some anti-vaxxers really got into it. And nobody got time for that. Oh, you know what? Now I got to redo my old my theory about why one of my Ghostbus tour drivers at Dunning felt a hand grabbing her ankle. I've always joked that it was, oh, that's Johann going, ooh, 56. But if he's been moved to Elmwood, that just upends one of my favorite bits. But I'm happy to admit when I got something wrong. And you know, as new data comes up, turns out stuff was wrong all the time. Rewinding the Earl. As much as I like the Benny, it is nice to mix it up a little bit. And Joanne, the anti-vaxxers showed up to call us sheep and, etc. And then I said, you can say this, you're gone. And somebody else said, oh, I guess you're not into social justice, like anti-vaxxers are covered by social justice. But it's effing Chicago, we don't give no shits. Like, this isn't effing Chicago, so I'll give a language warning here, but as Patty always says, when they go low, 0 fucks given. Well, that would be a good one to look up, Nat King Cole. I don't know if I can find anything early enough that I wouldn't be worrying. Gene, there was a copyright thing just on the YouTube. It's not that big of a deal, so I'll probably go back to it at some point. But it's nice to mix it up a little bit, too. And nice not to get 2 emails the next day all the time. Good night, Rob. Yeah, Tony, we went and found the marker for John Belushi on Find a Grave one time. Have a good night, Audrey. Gregory, I don't know enough about DB Cooper. I'll have to look him up. Thanks, Ronald. Now, Sarah, that was a singular. Y'all is singular down there. The plural is all y'all.
That's what you call a powerhouse coda. Yeah, Earl Powerhouse carries on and presents Leroy Harris to sing Teacher's Pet.
I went out to Bachelor's Grove most recently last October when I was filming stuff for one of the October Ghost Tours. And I'll admit it, I think it might have been, no, it wasn't the first time I've been there by myself, but walking through the woods, I always get more spooked in the woods leading up to it than I do in the cemetery itself. But walking through there, I did feel myself, yeah, the woods are just trees, the trees are just wood. Oh, about out of battery, let's fix that. Yin's from Pittsburgh. I don't know that one. Oh yeah, y'all. When I lived in Georgia, y'all was frequently used in the singular. I like to think it's an acknowledgement that we are large and contain multitudes. Now, Barbara, I felt a little uneasy, but not so much that I would turn around or anything. It's just, you know, my imagination will run away with me. I haven't seen Jupiter's Legacy yet. The Imperial Yawl, I love it. Like the Royal We.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
I love this announcer. Matching Crocs. I'm not doing the matching Crocs thing. I wore Crocs once. My dad said they were the most comfortable shoes he ever wore. After a day, and I'm like, do you normally just like tape some knives to your feet? Thanks everybody taking advantage of the PayPal being back. I'm very glad to have the PayPal back. I've been really into the QR code thing lately. Ever since I got rickrolled by one of them.
As long as we're driving out west here, well, let's stop and have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset. Right?
I gotta learn these songs so I can sing along with them. The only one I really know that has lyrics, vocals on this one is Tisket a Tasket. I don't want to sing that one. Okay, I liked The Boys, Octavio. I really started watching The Boys because my brother told me there was this deep dive Billy Joel reference that I'd enjoy. It's like, man, I had to watch a lot of faces getting ripped off to get to the Billy Joel there. Alex, I think I have a cape someplace. Top hat I do not own. Phantom the Opera mask, not yet, but I do need to pick one of those up.
My very sweetheart, good night. Many moons have passed since I've gone. I'll be back at crack of the dawn. Every blade of grass where I roam.
Yeah, I got no beef with the Rick Astley song. I remember my mom didn't like it when it first came out. She said his voice didn't match his face. And that's fair.
We'll stand beneath the moon and bid the Colorado sunset good night.
Now, I do have a fine selection of hats, but it takes a certain amount of panache to pull off a top hat. I don't really have it.
With a bow to Leroy Harris for the words, we turn on now to the next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Jive under the general heading of So Help Me. Love this guy. Good night, Bob. Giordano, that's an interesting path. I used to be in a band that did a negative version of this song. It's like, I will give you up, I will let you down. It was dark, man. Yeah, I remember the first few weeks Ice Ice Baby was on the radio. The what I was picturing was not what I saw when I saw Vanilla Ice on TV. I don't know what I thought the name came from, but I didn't stop to think about it. And I think it was John Densmore, the drummer from The Doors, said that he went to Woodstock just because Joe Cocker was playing. There was a rumor that he was white, which he didn't believe for a second. I did rather like The Simpsons' take on Morrissey a week or so ago. I know he was mad about it, but that just kind of makes it more fun. And Morrissey being so easy to tick off is part of why it's fun. You know, Giordano, I think every time Smiths fans hang out, the first thing they talk about is, of course, Morrissey's such a jerk. But I feel bad for the Van Morrison fans.
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of Earl Father Hines. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris to sing Now It Can Be Told.
Good night, Kristen.
Now that we have met, the world may know the sentimental story. The greatest romance they ever knew.
Yeah, it's like, I got a couple of Van Morrison records over here. I'm really glad I didn't have more of them or wasn't really invested in them.
Now it can be told, told as inspiration. Every other tale of boy meets girl is just an imitation. The great love story.
Where'd Miles go now? He was climbing up me a lot. Miles?
Now it can be told.
Oh, there he is. He's hanging out on the suitcase that I left us. Both of the cats love to sit on suitcases. I don't think we've had a cat that didn't love to sit on suitcases. No, Charlotte not feeling well. I've just left it out full. Good night, Jill. I'm gonna open the window. Hey, Todd. Thanks again. Thanks for coming, Sarah. See everybody in the morning. See you in the morning, Elaine.
Softly, the tropic breeze is blowing, rise with love light glowing, beside a moonlit stream. Faintly, the waterfall is singing, loving arms are clinging, beside a moonlit stream. My heart is a tom-tom, beating
Catherine, I feel your pain.
If this is only a dream, then why can it last forever, darling? The river murmurs sweetly that you are mine completely, beside a moonlit stream.
Stay wacky, Marty. Thanks, Joanne. Martin Van Morrison recently put out a double album with a lot of anti-lockdown songs and songs with titles like They Own the Media. And it's worse than it sounds. Not to mention that it's just the kind of basic blues that he can churn out in his sleep.
And now comes up number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
Good night, Susan. Okay, someone just requested money from me on PayPal. I'm just going to kind of leave that there for a minute. I'm guessing either somebody pushed the wrong button or really didn't like the tour. Now, Marie, when his last album came out, I'm friends with the guy who was his publicist, And the record company said he's got a new album coming out. He will not be doing publicity. He's only vaguely aware that he even has an album coming out. He just records and sends us the stuff. And yeah, it just sounds like the kind of stuff he could do in his sleep. Octavio, given that there's no message attached to it, I assume they just pushed the wrong button?
And down the groove now, we rather imagine you'll hear that famous 7 brass of Earl Hines in...
I'd sure need to defeat Pullman. He's the final boss at the end, for sure. Mini-bosses include Holmes. People who are mad that I debunked a lot of the Holmes stuff. Now, they'd be like the people who I have to, like, jump on before I get to Holmes. If I cut off Pullman's head, will I gain all his knowledge? Now, a friend of mine traveled with Van Morrison, like the early 70s. It was like driving from gig to gig. He said, you can learn a lot about the music industry by the fact that he had to scrape up change at every toll booth. Chris, yeah. He's a Goomba. The people who are deeply invested in the Holmes urban legends are the Koopas. Somewhere on level 4 I can get a Miles suit. Ted Templeman's book. I'll look it up. I'll read any rock book. I just read this long account of Kiss tours from 1983 to 1997. I'll read about any Kiss book, and I don't think they're a good band. I mean, they put on a fun show. But they don't have a lot of good songs. Though I did just manage to score. So I went to the record shop while I was in Iowa, picked up the new St. Vincent, which is really cool, but also Ace Frehley's solo record featuring New York Groove, which is probably the most tolerable Kiss recording. Gene, I strongly suspect it's people who are writing into, who are posting stuff about this on, like, white pride groups. It's not so much that I'm dancing on a grave, it's that I'm calling a guy racist. Believe me, I'm pretty good about cutting people historical slack, but Wilbur F. Story goes too far. Yes, Miles is the grave baron where I fly to a different level. That's it. Now, Laura, I'm not sure I believe all the stuff in the dirt. I mean, heroin addicts don't remember what happened to them half an hour ago, let alone 20 years ago. But it's one of the most entertaining rock books out there, and it does defy all logic that those guys are still alive. Especially that all 4 of them are. And same thing with Kiss. There's no logical reason Ace or Peter should still be alive by this point. Eli's definitely Luigi. When he and I used to play Mario, he always had to be Luigi because he's the younger brother. Ronnie could save herself from Pullman. But alright, I think it's about time we wrap things up for tonight. I'm having a good time hanging out with everybody, of course, but here's what is coming up. Sunday morning will be Unsolved Mysteries from Chicago History. I'll expand on a couple of this stuff. Thursday, Time Travel Pub Crawl. Brand new one. Been sending out messages to musicians, trying to get everything lined up. These things take a while to set up. I don't know why I gave myself 8 days this time. And again, the Thursday after that, just so you know, I will be on the road. I'm still going to try to keep as much of a schedule as I can, but we got some stuff going on. So, and in any case, mini tours, including Find a Grave Friday tomorrow morning. And Fridays at 6:30 on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, The Whiskey and a Cookie Show, in which Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. So lots of good stuff coming up. Thanks for joining me for another edition of Antique Serial Killers from Chicago History. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tour saying stay safe, stay sane, stay tisketing, stay tasketing. Never let me say that again. But most importantly, stay spooky. Have a good night.